You are live.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning here at the City of Annapolis. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is the second workshop for the West Annapolis Master Plan. For those who were at the first workshop back in August, it was a little chaotic at times, maybe in a good way. We're trying to do things more structured tonight. I'm going to explain how that's going to work, but we have Alderman Payon here tonight. Thanks for joining. You could save all the toughest questions for him. Just kidding. This is going to be primarily led by our consultant team from Stantec. David Dixon, Jason Besky, Jess Alexander, Scott Lane, Sally Nash, planning director, is here. Eric Borchers from Comprehensive Planning Division is also here, and several other planning staff are also listening in. So we're doing this more as a kind of conventional webinar style tonight. There's going to be several junctures during the presentation where we're going to have Q&A opportunities, and we're going to have some specific questions that the consultant team wanted to ask of folks. At those points, you'll see the questions on the screen. Jason is going to go over how the Zoom interface works here, but we're going to ask folks to raise their hand, and we'll call on you and let you voice your question, and we'll be able to have a little back and forth to try to answer your question. Of course, anything that doesn't get answered tonight, we'll be able to address later. You'll see my contact info at the end. And just before I hand things over to Jason and David, I just want to say, the first workshop back in August was really helpful. We got a lot of great input and understanding, what kind of folks felt about the future of this commercial area in West Annapolis. The consultant team has been processing that, doing existing conditions type analysis, and developing some preliminary concepts for the area that they're going to share tonight. And so the thing to keep in mind is that these are ideas that that the consultant team feels would advance the goals that we heard at the first workshop, and the idea is that we hear your thoughts tonight on how you feel about these ideas, and then they ultimately get kind of sewn together into a more cohesive concept for scenario for the commercial district here, and something that we can advance and find ways of implementing down the road. It's going to feed most immediately into the comprehensive plan. And Jason, why don't you go to the next slide? I'll just kind of quickly walk through that, where we are in the comprehensive plan process. So I updated this recently just to kind of reflect the schedule realities. I'm a little more than 4 months into my role here at the city, and have been absorbing things a mile a minute. I feel like I'm nearly caught up to understanding the core issues that we're looking at for the comp plan. And so basically we're in a phase of starting to develop the draft comp plan, and that's why we're kind of working on this West Annapolis master plan timeline in this way, so that by January we would have some final recommendations that we can feed into the comp plan. We do have a comp plan update event November 17th that you all should be hearing about soon. I think a Facebook event notice just went out today on the City of Annapolis's Facebook page, and we're going to be promoting that. And so that'll be another opportunity to participate in the comp plan. here about how we're kind of using the analysis of the city to generate goals and recommendations. And I encourage anybody that has more questions about the overall comp plan to check out the website we have for the Annapolis Ahead, the city's comprehensive plan, on our planning and zoning website. And additionally, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, and we can chat. But at this point, I'll hand things over to Jason, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Thanks, Eric. I do see that we already have one hand up. And from Kristen, and I don't, assuming it might be a technical question. We're going to try to stop at certain junctures throughout.
Well, Jason, I'll just jump in. Just a reminder to anyone who might have joined late is that your cameras and your audio will not be on until designated times where there will be a Q&A section. I'm guessing that is Kristen's question right now.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and let's let Kristen ask the question now, just to make sure we can kind of.
Kristen, you are unmuted.
I'm all good, thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, well, we got to test it real quick. So, all right, well, thank you, everyone. It's great to be back again. Again, Jason Besky with Stantec, leading team with David Dixon, Jess Alexander from Stantec. We also have Bilal Ali on here, who's part of the consulting team in Scott Lane. If you remember, if you were with us last time in August, we'll give a recap, but we really organized things into three main buckets. So what I'm going to do now is go over the agenda and talk to those buckets as we jump into the presentation. But the three buckets really, and the way we laid it out, is open space, land uses, which relates to buildings and how properties are used, and mobility are the three areas we're going to talk around. So if you remember from last time, we got into, as Eric had mentioned, kind of a visionary discussion at that first workshop. And this, again, is to really bring forth some ideas. And we really want to create a conversation tonight to bounce some things off of you so that when we come back in a few months, we can really start to hone in on what it is that the neighborhood wants to see in this neighborhood plan. So we absolutely came into this with no preconceived notions about what would happen. So as we get through tonight's meeting and talk through existing conditions that we saw, some of the poll results from last time, and then some of our recommendations to explore, as Eric mentioned, we'll have questions for you. But it's really to kind of have a conversation, work with you as a neighborhood group, and really fine tune what this plan means for West Annapolis as we move into the comprehensive plan stage. So with that, I'm going to real quickly, if anybody is not familiar with Zoom, put together a couple slides here. You will notice, well, these are snapshots we took. Disregard any bad pictures you may see, but on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a participants icon, and to raise your hand, which Eric mentioned is the way we're going to try to take questions and prioritize questions this evening. That will pull up a sidebar that looks like this. And on that sidebar, if you go to the bottom, you'll see a little box or a little icon that says raise hand and lower hand. So we ask that if you want to raise your hand and ask a question when we get to the end there of each section of those three buckets, please do that. But also make sure to lower your hand when you're done speaking. There's also a chat function here. We can use that. We're going to try to keep as much as possible to a conversation amongst everyone on the call here. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to David to introduce everybody, or introduce the presentation this evening.
Okay, thanks. I was able to meet many of you virtually in August, as Eric said, and probably more importantly, Jason and I and the rest of the team got to hear from you, and you said a lot of very important things. And we want to really pick up from what you told us and go forward from that point, because we thought that you actually articulated a pretty compelling, if not vision, sense of what you love about West Annapolis and the kind of community you wanted it to continue to be, and in fact, be more of. And as we thought about the things we had heard, we noticed that a great many of them focused on the ability to sort of come together and celebrate the unique community that you are, both in terms of place and in terms of places to get together. And out of this came a series of initiatives that we felt were particularly important. And Jason is going to go through these in much more detail, but I'm going to sort of give you the headlines. It starts with, I'll use the word parks, but it's really places to get together and get together in lots of different ways. Sit on grass, watch your kids play on grass, sit at a table and have some coffee or beer. Be able to meet, share space, share experience, share life in a variety of ways. And there are some really good opportunities here. Again and again, people talked about how they love the fact that West Annapolis is walkable. And a lot of folks then talked about the things they like to walk to. Lots of folks, it's not so much even a nice tree-lined sidewalk that encourages folks to walk, but places to walk to, whether it's a park, or a lot of you talked about wanting more places to grab a bite to eat, to run into friends, to shop, amenities, services that could be right in the heart of West Annapolis. So a number of you talked about the fact you had to leave West Annapolis to do things and that were part of even daily life in some cases. You'd love to have them here, but also because these are ways that bring you together. You then talked about streets and traffic and through traffic that diminished walkability, kind of was in conflict with your sense of a very cohesive neighborhood, and wanted us to address that. And finally, this brings us to, and we are going to talk about all these things, to the sort of tools that we have to look at. You are lucky. Many communities have to figure out how they go out and sort of interest the market in coming and investing the things that will achieve what they want. You probably have pretty strong market demand, but there are things you need to really look at. You need to look at zoning that makes sure that you can, folks can come in and invest in your community and create the kinds of things that you want. In some cases, that's actually harder than you might think. You've got a lot of surface parking that's using up land that could be used for parks and places for people to live and things that really build the community. And we want to look hard at parking. You, I think, really talked a lot about you don't just want land uses zoned, you want the quality and character of what's built to be addressed so that you really can look forward to investment in your community, building the kind of community you want. So on that note, let me turn it over to Jason, who's going to make all this a lot more tangible.
All right. Thank you, David. All right. So for each section, I'm going to go through a little bit on our polling from last time, which I thought was very interesting, and then talk a little bit about existing conditions that we observed in the neighborhood, and then provide those recommendations or areas of discussion that I had mentioned. On the polling, we had roughly, I think, the largest response we had on a poll question, I think it was like 55, Eric, between 50 and 60. Some of the questions we got 30 to 40 responses. So I think it's pretty characteristic of the neighborhood and who was in attendance at that first meeting. But just real quickly to recap who was at the meeting. And what we saw was most people, as expected, were from West Annapolis or the Wardour neighborhood. And interestingly, there was a good split of where people work. Several people work in West Annapolis, not in Annapolis, and in Annapolis. I think part of the nature of people working in West Annapolis is likely due to the pandemic and work from home. And then on that first question, we did see that the pandemic has moderately impacted families and businesses. So all of this kind of makes sense. We also ask how long people commute to work. Driving and walking is a big issue, mobility, how we get around. But again, we found 0 to 10 minutes was the average commute or predominant commute for most people in West Annapolis, which again, I think is a function of pandemic and people likely working from home or in the neighborhood. And then more than 50% of the attendees had a household size of 2 people, which interestingly is going to be a pretty common occurrence over the next 2 decades as demographics and preferences change. All right, so what did we see in open space analysis? First, I want to start with a map, just high level, starting to map what open spaces, trails are around West Annapolis. We know about the street and park. The elementary school, this could very much as well be a green area. You have a green field here. Actually, I'll be interested to hear if people actually use the elementary school as an open space in an area to play. We heard quite a few comments about the boat launch and enhancing that potentially. And then probably the closest organized and substantial open space is down here to the corner. It's the Annapolis Sports Complex. Then we also went ahead and mapped trails and bike lanes, and this will come up again in mobility. I'm starting with the open space, but the only bike lane that currently exists is this solid blue line along Melvin that ends at the elementary school. One thing I was struck by in visiting and looking at existing conditions for West Annapolis was the tree canopy. I thought there was a very, you can see here on this image how much green there is. And there's a very mature tree canopy compared to a lot of communities. And I think it's something that can really be built upon. And you'll see one of the recommendations later about enhancing that tree canopy and actually creating this green spine of trees. And I'll explain that a bit later. But there are really some good opportunities to build on that network. For open space polling, as I get into open space, we asked a series of questions. First one being, to what degree do you agree that the parks and open space in and around West Annapolis satisfy your needs for open space? There was a pretty even split. Quite a few felt that their open space needs were satisfied in and around West Annapolis, but I would say probably 2/3 of people said somewhat true to not true at all. So there might be a gap there, in looking at the map in the context of open spaces and starting to hear some of these things, it starts to fill in the picture for us that there is certainly a need or desire for open space in West Annapolis. A large percentage of people do go elsewhere to access parks, as you can see in question number 2. And then we also asked about what kind of open space you would like to see in West Annapolis. And then the highest were a green lawn for informal playing events, a plaza near retail, and then parklets, small little neighborhood parks throughout the community or throughout the neighborhood. But there were also pedestrian promenade, playgrounds, and trails. And you'll see all of those a bit later. If another question was, if adequate parks and open space was available, which of the following programs would you support? This is an important question for us to know, in that when we propose a size of an open space or a configuration of open space, that is done intentionally to accommodate certain activities and programs. So what we found out is people really wanted to see a farmer's market accommodated in an open space, family events, and music and cultural events. And those are all events that can be accommodated in open lawn situation, or maybe you have a stage. There's a variety of ways to accommodate those activities, but I would say by and large, those are very popular neighborhood activities. And then we asked, what events would you like to see that may not be listed? And we got a range of those, from street fairs to lectures in the Budweiser parade. So, all right, so what we did was start to look at opportunities where we could perhaps find some nuggets of space, some areas within the neighborhood. And just to orient you here, actually this should be labeled, but this is Rowell Boulevard on the bottom. Taylor is here on the right side, Ridgely, Annapolis Street, Giddings, and Melvin here, but this is the school here. So we started to look at areas, and we really found 3 areas that we'll have to look at opportunities to work with property owners, but just looking at this from a physical design perspective, we saw 3 areas that could accommodate open spaces in the core of West Annapolis. And I'm going to just show a quick overview of those 3. This one here is at the corner of Giddings in Annapolis Street. You can see an aerial on the top right. This portion of it would not work. That has to accommodate pull-in parking under the office building here, but there's an area up front that could be adjacent to Annapolis Street, adjacent to Giddings, and provide a parklet or a neighborhood park type setting. You can see the aerial or the street view here with that lush tree canopy that I had mentioned along Annapolis Street and Giddings. The second area we looked at for potentially being able to accommodate an open space was down along Ridgely in Giddings. You can see an aerial. This would be a larger potential open space. Again, though, in all of these situations, we found them in parking lots where we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you'll have to offset the ability to be able to park to accommodate an open space. Again, this is going to be a presentation probably of trade-offs and being able to support certain amenities that you do want to see in the neighborhood. I think we'll be able to connect the dots as we go here. So the second open space could be a little larger than the one up along Annapolis Street. You can see the street view here. There's some grade to work with, but absolutely could accommodate a lot of activities. And then the third space we see here is in front of the Grauls. Obviously, this is a large parking lot. Anything that would happen here as far as open space or redevelopment is contingent on redevelopment, time uncertain, but you really have a land bank here in a large blank slate if a redevelopment does occur to make an open space that is as large or small as would be functional for the activities you want to see. Obviously, there would be trade-offs with any developer that would come in and build here. But so each of these three have different dimensions, different locations, and as we get into mobility and land use, you'll see the context of each one shifts a little bit. But I think what's important to know, what is happening, I think, in West Annapolis is there's really no other types of open space like this in Annapolis. They don't really exist. There's currently nothing that's designed to work with the context or hand in hand with the context adjacent to it. So I think what you have here is a really good opportunity to lead with an open space of what you would like to see and develop the context or create the context of this neighborhood park from the start. So it's a really good opportunity. Another concept we've been kicking around earlier, I mentioned that tree canopy is this is Giddings here. We talked about and thought about creating a green spine of pretty dense tree canopy that would line that entire avenue and create a very good pedestrian friendly connection from all the way down to Rao or at least to the shopping area from Annapolis Street. You can see here, these are three potential park locations. The way we're projecting this is that one of these locations would work, but it's not to say that more than one of these couldn't work in the future, depending on how things worked out. So we're proposing three potential locations for open space. We're proposing a green spine, and I think I have and then you'll see as we get into mobility, when we talk about streets, there's going to be a section between Ridgely and Annapolis here along Giddings that we're going to call a festival street. And this green spine will work in conjunction with it, but I'll be able to show some images and some details behind what that will look like here in a bit. But that wraps up an analysis and some recommendations for us to kind of kick around at a high level for the open space. So really the questions continue to be, are the locations and sizes of the open spaces adequate for West Annapolis? We talked about several of those programmed events that we'd like to see. And then also what activities should be accommodated. We talked earlier about what should be accommodated, but I want to have a further discussion about what it is you really want to see, because as we go from this conceptual level in this workshop and start to develop a more detailed master plan, we're going to really hone in on some of those activities and more specific design elements that will support what it is that you want to see in the neighborhood. So I think it's important to have a conversation. I would like to hear from the group here if you have a question, or if you want to kind of start off the conversation by raising your hand. We can kick off, and I can move back to slides and go through that. But I just put a series of images on here for different types of activities. We use some of these before in the presentation, but we have trails, we have a pavilion, a plaza, pop-up plaza, green space with water, and playgrounds. So, but I'd like to hear from you guys on the call here and see what it is how you would answer any of these questions. I see one hand raised by Ford.
Yeah. Before we take the questions, I just want to piggyback onto something you said, Jason. This is Eric, again from City of Annapolis. I think some of the ideas that folks are going to see in the presentation, I'm just imagining this might be a question that people have, they are identified for properties that are currently owned privately, whether they're surface parking lots or not. Part of the goal here is develop ideas that the community can support that can go into this master plan so that we can kind of ideally get ahead of any property changeover that might happen in the future, and that's kind of what we're aiming for here, is to develop a plan that that we have in place. So when there is a proposed development, we have some ideas that we know the community is behind, and the city can kind of work with those property owners.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I meant to mention that. So as Eric said earlier, this will absolutely at a policy level fold into the comprehensive plan. So it's really coming up with ideas and a playbook or strategies to a degree, so that when redevelopment does occur, the neighborhood has kind of a roadmap to achieve that. So thank you for raising that.
Sure.
David, did you want to say anything at all, add anything before we jump into questions? You're good?
It looks like
Okay.
Ford.
Yeah, I've said, let's be great to hear questions. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me. I hope so.
Yep.
We
In
can
any event, first of all, Stantec has a terrific reputation, and I appreciate what you've done. But I'm going to be a little bit critical here because I think geographically you've been myopic. You haven't thought about the larger picture. We have land all around West Annapolis that could easily be incorporated through the use of pedestrian overpasses. For example, number one is across Rao Boulevard to that area next to the courthouse, to the new courthouse in the direction of the Academy's football field. And then the second one would be to look at the area around the water tower that's close to the Academy on the other side. That area, if we could walk around there, you don't even need an overpass to get there. And the third thing is an overpass that ends up getting us to the park that's over by the Department of Natural Resources. That expands what we think about as our community. And it is walkable if we do it that way. And then the other thing you might do along Ridgely Avenue is create a sidewalk so that people can safely walk across the bridge, maybe if you get the county on your side, all the way to the churches at the end of Ridgely. In other words, make this a larger community. What I've thought about all along in this was that, we have the waterfront, and yet the only thing in this plan that would use the waterfront is the pier over by the school. That's it's not a pier really, but it's the boat ramp down in that area there. We might also consider, and I know this is probably heresy for some of the people on this call, thinking about get the Wardor Association to grant the city the right to develop some of those properties that they have on the waterfront so that other people can use them. In other words, that probably won't fly with them, but it's worth thinking about, to not limit ourselves to just thinking about what everybody's excited about doing, and start thinking about what our grandchildren would like if they want to live here. And that's sort of my, 40 years ago, I did an urban affairs fellowship at the University of Chicago and looked at a lot of creative ideas. Almost all of them died because people weren't willing to take the risk that people would shoot it down. And I think this is an opportunity to say, let's take some risks. Let's think about what would make this a better community. Let's think about the areas adjacent to what we call West Annapolis and how we might develop it. And so that's my rant for tonight, but I appreciate what y'all are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Ford. Just quickly, we will, Mr. Rowan, we will be going into specifically the sidewalk issue. So when we get to mobility, but I appreciate your comments on the connectivity. It's good to hear that. And, I'd have a few questions around that as to, access rights and whatnot. But we're absolutely open to hearing about potential strategies to expand access and connectivity to West Annapolis. It makes a lot of sense.
But Jason, I'll just add quickly, We may not come back with pedestrian bridges per se, because those often sound more attractive than they turn out to be and more usable, and a lot of folks can't use them. But that doesn't mean that we can't do what you're really, I think, telling us, admonishing us to do, is to look at connections beyond the neighborhood to these resources that you could all use and enjoy.
And you didn't tell me your son works for Stan Tech.
Okay. Looks like we have a question from Sarah Benson.
Hi, thanks everyone. I wasn't able to make the last meeting, so this has been really helpful. And the idea of more community green spaces seems exciting. I think I had been going to raise this similar questions about connectivity. So I live in West Annapolis, Warder. I work at St. John's. I have an 11-year-old who's just old enough to explore on her own. And I would think as a teenager, I would like her to be able to walk downtown, right? And that just would be part of her stomping grounds. But there's not really safe places to cross the street or a safe biking corridor. And because traffic is so bad in our neighborhood, because it gets clogged by traffic going over the bridge to the Eastern Shore, if it were feasible, if these areas are attractive, that you're building to more people in Annapolis generally, it would be great if it were actually possible to walk or bike here and not just bring in more cars.
Okay, thank you for that. And we will get into that in a little bit when we talk about mobility a bit more. So thank you for that, though.
Definitely a shared goal.
And I have an 11-year-old who I'm encouraging to explore as well. So it's a great, respectable goal. Good luck.
And there are some, when we get into the mobility section, I could also update folks on some of the things we're working on in that regard.
Sure, that'd be good, Eric. Yeah. All right, are there any other questions? We will stop at the very end again for any questions that you may have that are just general questions. So if you think of anything on the open space topic between now and then, feel free to bring it up at the end. But if I don't see any other hands raised, I'm going to go ahead and move along. Eric, you think?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about land use analysis and recommendations. Again, land use is, when I say land use, I mean essentially zoning or the way the land is used, building size and massing. So it has to do with land use and architecture. So what we'll get into here a little bit is about what type of buildings you think are appropriate for West Annapolis and what types of uses would you like to see in West Annapolis. So first, let me revisit some of the poll questions we had. And part of the use refers to housing and residential as well as retail and office or commercial uses. So in the poll, most people, I think, absent one person, lives in a single family detached home in West Annapolis, which is, that's the primary housing stock in the area. It makes sense. What type of home would you like to live in next? We're always looking to find out what that next move is so we can think about supply. And again, people primarily wanted to stay or move into a single family detached home, but more people started to think about condos and apartments, which is trend-wise, we will likely see more of that in the next we will see more of that in the next 2 decades based on normal family sizes or average family sizes. And then most people own their home. I think it was one person was renting that took the poll. We asked how likely people were to remain in where they are now. Most people said very likely, which I thought was great. I think it speaks to the charm and the character of the neighborhood and the attractiveness and the sense of community of the neighborhood. And then, do you feel that you have the ability to age in place in your neighborhood? And again, most people felt yes, which I thought was great, that they can continue to be a viable member of the neighborhood and into their older years. So that's great to see. As far as shopping is concerned, we ask if people shop in West Annapolis for daily needs. These are, daily service needs like a pharmacy or groceries or something to drink. And most people said they are able to shop in West Annapolis or occasionally shop in West Annapolis. People preferred to shop at the West Annapolis Shopping Center where the Grawls is. People also shopped outside of West Annapolis, which makes sense in the city. And then we asked what types of businesses people would like to see in West Annapolis, and primarily restaurants, but also services, bars made it in. And then the grocer was extremely important that a grocer be maintained in West Annapolis. Even if redevelopment were to occur on the corner of Rao and Taylor, I think it's important to, in one way, shape, or form, to continue to incorporate a grocer within that development. And there's many ways to do that. All right, just wanted to speak to the character of West Annapolis. We're very aware of that, have looked closely at that, and we want that character to continue to permeate through that area, particularly along Annapolis Street as you move away from the single family neighborhoods into the retail area. So that is really kind of the undertone of what we're trying to do here is create a West Annapolis that is familiar to you, but also has additional amenities that could be supported by additional development in the future, the next 10 to 20 years. This is an interesting graphic to me, and what this shows is topography. And so if you look at the top here, this is the Quartz building in the foreground along Rao Boulevard, all the way up to Annapolis Street here. And what's interesting is Rao Boulevard, we found, was 13 feet below Annapolis Street. So there's a steady decline from Annapolis Street in the neighborhoods north of Annapolis Street down to Rao Boulevard. And the reason we look at that is when we start to look at building heights that we're recommending in certain areas and how those would impact adjacent development. And what that tells me is that with that 13-foot drop, you have the ability to go a little higher along Rao, along the retail area, without having as much of an impact as you typically would as if it was at the same elevation as Annapolis Street to those single family neighborhoods. Plus you get the distance is quite a ways away from the single family neighborhoods. Just a real quick overview of what we're seeing for current redevelopment projects in West Annapolis. Eric, I think all, but if you want to remind me, one and
they're all,
which ones are finally approved?
Oh, you were going, which ones are approved?
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, I think just one is 1 and 4. 4
Okay.
is under construction, and I think 1 is the only one that is
Okay.
permitted at this point. But
okay, so you'll see number 1 being built up along Annapolis Street, actually next to the Rutabaga, which is moving to the drive-in drive-through here on number 4. And then you'll see along Giddings here, as these proposals 2 and 3 go through, this street front may fill out in the near term. Real quick overview on the zoning. We talked about this a little bit last time. You have 4 unique zoning districts in here. This is at a very regulatory level, not at a land use level like we're trying to talk to in a comp plan, but this gives you the essence of what land uses are allowed or disallowed in West Annapolis. So you have these 4 zoning districts. I'm going to go through one at a time here. So you have what's called the P district, or the professional office district. And that's this chunk right here. You can see up to Rao, back to Ridgely. I just wanted to call out uses that you cannot have in this district. And for example, a coffee shop, a bake shop, a bar, and a restaurant would not currently be allowed with the zoning that you have here. So if there's any redevelopment, those uses would not be allowed in that district.
And Jason, I'll just point out, ironically, folks will pay more rent to be able to work upstairs above one of those uses, or when you've got one down the block. So
absolutely, yeah. There's definitely an economic perspective here. The B2 district is where your most intense retail is. Here, you cannot do nursing home, multifamily dwellings, or bars, just to throw a few out there. In your professional office district, mixed use district, you can't do, and then you can see here, that's kind of that transition ring around the north and the west corner. You can't have retail, ice cream, bars, or motel. And I'm not saying you want to have these or you're going to have these, but this is just a few uses that the neighborhood might want to see at some point in the future. And it speaks to the fact that the zoning just isn't doesn't coordinate with that. And then finally, along Annapolis Street, the B1 zoning district, retail district, you can't have these certain uses down on the bottom right here. And I'm guessing there's a couple here that people probably would want to see possible to happen along Annapolis Street. So what we did was start to look kind of at how the district laid out from an urban design perspective and functionality perspective. And we came up with these 4 key districts. And this is how we're going to start looking at, I think, land uses and how they kind of work together with the neighborhood. And starting with the village, these are just placeholder names, but they may stick. But the way we envision West Annapolis is it becomes kind of a special district within the new comprehensive plan, where there is special considerations and potentially regulations, but ultimately there's going to be ways to implement this plan, and doing it around these 4 areas I think will be key. So we have a village main street, which is Annapolis Street. We have this transition zone, we call it village transition, from the lower scale Annapolis Street over to the Rao Boulevard corridor. And then we have the village corridor, which takes up this area here. And then the most intense area is the village square, we're calling it. And I'm going to go through each of these 4 districts and just show some precedent images for the types of development we could envision seeing here. Again, we're going to ask questions about whether these are the right considerations. So bear with us as we go through this. So first, on Village Main Street, I think the character should by all means be maintained. It's charming, it's great, it's walkability is pedestrian friendly. So we just show some images of current development. We know the current redevelopment is going to happen up along the Rutabaga. I think that's very much in character with what we see along Annapolis. So I think the city is doing a great job of continuing to promote that type of character. The village transition zone is where we're going to start recommend potentially 3, maybe 4-story buildings as you get closer to Rao Boulevard. But that's going to be a series of either residential units above retail, potentially offices, or potentially just retail or townhome units. But these are some pictures we think would possibly fit well within that transition zone. Again, 3 to 4 stories, retail on the ground floor, or stoops for residential on the ground floor. The village corridor area is even more intense than that and offers more intense uses and retail uses. We're thinking anywhere from 4 to 5 stories could work here. Our current development in West Annapolis does not exceed 4 stories, but there are some tall 4-story buildings. So this would be pretty close to being in character with what exists now. I guess the key consideration is, does the development here go 1 story higher than what you see currently? There are benefits to going higher. I'm going to let David speak to kind of critical mass and having more units to support amenities here in a bit. But so that's the village corridor. And then finally, the village square is the most intense use, where we would like to see a retail main street. This is where you're potentially you would have an open space that has a plaza next to the retail, where you have residential units above retail. It's kind of I suppose the town square or the village square that we're calling it. So those are the key land use considerations. So we're gonna rest on that for a second and ask a few questions. And you can see those on the screen. Are building heights a concern in West Annapolis? And if so, what heights are acceptable in each of these districts? And the second question is, what land uses should be included in West Annapolis? And should anything be excluded? And by all means, if you have something to ask or comment off of these questions, by all means do so. I'm just hoping to get some conversation started and start to get some either consensus or comments on what we have been proposing here. So anybody want to comment on that? Any hands to raise? Alderman Payon, you want to say?
Yeah, I think it depends on where in West Annapolis we're talking about. If you're near Taylor Avenue, if you're right next to Rao Boulevard, that's one thing. But back on Annapolis Street,
yeah.
I think that's something totally different.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking to maintain that character, Alderman, is that West Annapolis or the Annapolis Street would still be the 2-story predominantly. And then the village square, where we're showing these pictures on the right, is where you would have the most intensity. I mean, does 5 stories seem like too much to you? Could there be more stories than 5 stories?
Closer to Rao Boulevard, right? Is what you mean.
Closer to Rao and Taylor. Again, this is quite a ways below grade from Annapolis Street, so it really starts to step down. But this is also furthest away from single family development where most intense development typically would happen. I see Sarah has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I don't mean to be asking all of the questions.
Please do.
It looked promising to see mixed use spaces that would combine more residential areas with some kind of street liveliness that would be possible with more different kind of shops. And I hadn't realized how much current zoning kind of prevents that. I wondered if there would also be some space set aside for affordable housing, because there doesn't seem right now to be very diverse mixed use housing in the neighborhood. And how much of sort of the current buildings, especially on Annapolis Street, might be preserved because older buildings would tend to have lower rents and allow more experimental new kinds of shops to come in. Thank you.
Excellent points. Yeah, that was a really good point, I think, about Annapolis Street and affordable retail. So if you are preserving older buildings, it typically is more affordable. David, do you want to say anything to that, or you?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Also, I will just point out that, how should I say it? For all kinds of reasons, including community support or lack thereof, it's an awful lot easier to think about redevelopment and change on a site like Village Square than it is on a much smaller site or lot with a house on it, or an older building that's got a shop on the ground floor and somebody living above or working above. It's pretty unlikely, and I don't think we see any reason to suggest buildings like that should be changed or redeveloped. It's the gaps, it's the surface parking lots, and particularly near to Route Boulevard, where the idea of where the ability to build a couple floors of housing on top of retail makes it a lot easier to build that retail and to pay for a new park or public space and the kinds of things that folks have said that they would like to have as ways to enhance the quality and character of West Annapolis. I think one plan, I just realized, Jason, looking at this, we should probably quickly do is point out to folks, do a map that shows where change is likely, because I think the biggest surprise would be, other than that big parking lot in front of Village Square, how little of, it's unlikely that a blade of grass is going to be changed in 95% of West Annapolis by new investment that comes. Is this making, and folks, let me know if this makes sense.
Yep. No, that's a good idea, David. Okay. Thank you. Rebecca, I see you have your hand up.
I do. Hi. Piggybacking on to the affordable housing question. Are there any statutes in Anne Arundel County or the state of Maryland that incentivize developers to include deed restricted affordable housing as part of their redevelopment projects? I know we had that in Connecticut. You could get like, you could build extra units if you deed restricted some of them as affordable housing, and it caused developers to do it where there otherwise wouldn't have been economic incentives to do so.
Sally,
So in Annapolis, we have inclusionary zoning, which means that for developments with more than 10 units or 10 or more units, you have to include 15% of the units have to be moderately priced, which is based on a federal standard of average housing costs in your neighborhood, in your region. And so that's for either rental or to buy. And if you do provide these MPDUs, is what we call them, the incentive is that you get a 20% tolerance to something in the bulk regulations. So you might get a little more floor area than you would get under other circumstances, which is not so much of an incentive as a way to offset the cost of providing the affordable housing. But I think it is worth looking at more robust incentives to actively encourage it rather than just have it be a requirement for a certain number of units. But there isn't anything in Anne Arundel County like that. Although they've recently opened up some of their zoning districts that don't currently allow residential to allow workforce housing, like their industrial districts, which I don't think we'd want to do in the city. But we can think about other incentives that might encourage developers to build more affordable workforce housing or even low and moderate income housing projects.
Thanks.
Good question. I'd say just the ability to have housing choice. Right now it's predominantly single family. Just the ability to have either townhomes or condos may be affordable to more people, but it's not, quote unquote, affordable housing. But having housing choice does allow more people to entertain living in a neighborhood potentially. So, any other questions on land use?
We got Alex Klein here, also
Sorry.
Julian he's on the panelist.
Thanks, Eric. I just want to make a comment in the interplay between building form and use. So, my feeling is that we definitely shouldn't focus at all very much on use. I would like this whole area to be mixed use. So, whether you're down on Annapolis Street or up towards Rao Boulevard, the kinds of activities you could do wouldn't necessarily change between the areas. They could be residences, in a smaller building, they're going to be smaller units. If it's a larger building, there may be more units, or, in terms of commercial activity, whether you want a pet store on Annapolis Street or up towards Rao Boulevard, or an ice cream shop, who cares? I don't think we should say this kind of thing, this kind of activity only belongs on this block, and this kind of activity belongs on a different block. I think that's part of what's stifling some of the economic activity in West Annapolis now, is you have if you want to do, have a retail store that does X, there's generally very limited areas that you can do that. So I'd like to see, and I think you're on the right track, but with the idea of let's concentrate on building form in these different areas, but not restrict what can happen within those forms to, a particular use, because that's sort of what's gotten us into trouble in the zoning world over the last 50, 70 years, is the strict separation of uses.
Yep.
So I'd like to see, this whole thing be sort of, in terms of use, like a mixed use. You could have any combination of residences and in businesses, as long as you don't put a copper smelting plant in someplace. Obviously that's not a compatible use, but I think by concentrating on the building form, that in a certain regard is going to dictate what the uses will be. So if it's a small building, you're not going to put a 100-seat restaurant. Maybe you could put a small 20-seat restaurant in a place that's a bigger building, vice versa. So I think concentrating on form and what people see and not the activity is really going to be the best. And I'm happy to see you're doing that.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Got your comment, understood.
Jason, somebody had a question about parking, which is, I know you're going to come to parking. I thought I could.
Yep, mobility is next, and it is the final section here. So do we have?
Can I jump ahead just to
Go ahead. You may.
Okay,
yeah, go ahead.
So it doesn't hang out there. So we're going to take a really, I don't want to steal Jason's thunder here, but a really careful look at parking requirements so that all our recommendations are real. They are parked. Generally, in fact, consistently, we have found that places have a lot of parking already that can be shared, for example, by office or housing, which saves a lot of money, makes it easier to create affordable housing, and lowers rents when even people build market rate housing. We also are entering a period where people are actually owning fewer cars because it's a lot easier to move around through Uber or Lyft, et cetera. We are in the next 10 or 12 years going to enter a period where cars will actually, I don't want to sound Jetson here, but it's in about 12 years, a majority of us who own cars will have cars that park themselves a lot more compactly than we park them. So a parking area that parks 20 cars will be able to park 25 or more, maybe 30 cars, so that we can get more out of the parking we have. So by and large, and we'll come back and give you and substantiate this, we don't see the need to provide parking as an obstacle to the kind of development that you're talking about, nor do we think that we're also confident we'll be able to, as Jason suggested, redevelop some of the big surface parking lots that you've got or smaller into things that contribute to quality of life. And the final thing I want to comment on, and I noticed that Eric did, was somebody has said you would prefer 2 or 3 floors of housing over retail as opposed to 4 or 5. And we certainly get that. And frankly, most of the redevelopment in West Annapolis is going to be, one lot at a time. This is, there are not many areas where major change can occur. It's really Village Square, where we're going to have to think hard about how many units of floors of housing really make it feasible to redevelop and pay for a park and things like that. And we'll come back and suggest trade-offs to you, so that if to me, and I think to us, development is a tool to provide community development. It's not community benefits, not the reverse.
Well
I see we
said.
have 2 hit. Oh, you got it, Eric?
Yeah, sure. Rebecca, I think, and then Molly is the order. Rebecca Brenia and then Molly Smith.
Thanks. I did want to comment on the height because I feel like we just kind of went past that. It is awkward when there's like one building or one area that looks super high, but an example of an area where there are like a decent number of floors and it still kind of blends in, I think, is the Westin Hotel. So I would kind of over on West Street, and I would just think like we probably wouldn't want to go any higher than that, would be my thought.
How tall is that for those of us who don't know? May I ask?
I feel like it's is it 7 stories? It's been a while since I've seen it.
And it could just be that, I mean, it's in an area of other buildings kind of that high. So that actually, maybe that would be too high for this area, but it definitely is. It's a higher building, but it doesn't feel like, it still feels cozy when you're walking over there. So
The maximum height is 7.
Is it 7? Okay.
I think
Well,
it's
I mean,
steps.
and Rebecca, to Alex's point earlier, if you get the building form right, there's ways to do step backs and how you address the ground floor and the pedestrian kind of the view plane. So there's ways to make 6 and 7 stories a lot more pedestrian scaled through architectural techniques. So that's an interesting example. We'll have to take another look at that.
Okay, and Jason, I think it can't be emphasized enough that for most of West Annapolis, just given the kinds of sites that could be redeveloped, that probably wouldn't make sense at all. It's pretty obvious how tall buildings should be. It's really Village Square, maybe along Rao Boulevard, or Rao, I'll call it, where we really might want to talk to you about, and I don't even know if we go to 7, it might be more 5-story buildings, but we could see. It's most unlikely that it would make sense for taller buildings to start popping up across West Annapolis. You simply don't have sites for them, even if you did want them, and you clearly don't.
Thanks, Rebecca. Did you have any other thoughts on that, or was that it?
No, that was it.
Okay, thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're doing well on time check. Eric, are we doing well?
Yeah, I think we're doing fine. Molly had her hand up. I guess it got lowered. And Molly, do you still have a point?
No.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay, so let me move into the final section tonight, and that is on mobility. And when I refer to mobility, I mean streets, sidewalks, trails, any way we get around our community. Starting with the polling questions, how do you access the retail and commercial businesses in West Annapolis? I thought this was a very interesting split, roughly 50-50 between walking and driving, but also there's some bikeability in the area. We asked if people can access daily needs, services and shopping. Most people within walking distance. That's the key. If you can access it within walking distance, most people said yes. One thing I find interesting is now when Rutabaga moves, does that continue? Does that shift your perception of being able to access daily needs within walking distance? Is that one of those gems in the community? And then the third question was, do you feel that West Annapolis has adequate sidewalks? And that was a pretty even split. And I'll go over some deficiencies we saw in the sidewalk network here in just a little bit. Next question, did you feel that West Annapolis has adequate bike lanes? It was about half and half. Again, the only bike lane that is on paper and on the street is on Melvin up to the elementary school. Do you feel like there's adequate parking? By and large, people said yes, we do feel there's adequate parking. Are there any unsafe intersections? Same amount of people said yes, there are unsafe intersections, and we mapped those based on what was listed here. We can talk about that in a second. All right, so moving on to this graphic, this is just a dump of everything we saw, so don't get too thrown off by all the colors, but you'll see colors around each of the blocks, and what those signify are what the sidewalk conditions are. If they're green, the sidewalk is above standard sidewalk condition or requirements. Red is below, yellow meets. When I say standard sidewalk, the current requirement, if you were to build a new development in West Annapolis, is that you have a 5-foot wide sidewalk for ADA compliance. So something that meets standards would be 5 feet wide and have no obstructions in it. You can see several of the pictures here, with trees in the way or that just dead end out of nowhere. But also I'm encouraged by what I see in West Annapolis in that these parklets or these outdoor seating areas are starting to pop up in the parking spaces. And I've been back several times now and they're being used more and more. So that's really encouraging to me that people are trying to take the neighborhood and make it their own. And I encourage that to continue. So then we also mapped the hazardous intersections. You can see the big orange dots. If you have any different thoughts, please let us know. But a key consideration for these intersections is making sure that there are adequate side crosswalks and markability for those who are in automobiles and in walking that can see each other. This is just a quick slide showing, and we'll be fine tuning this through the process, but what are those priority sidewalk enhancements, those areas that really need the upgrades? And a lot of it, it narrows quite a bit along Taylor. I don't know that that's 5 feet wide all the way. Ridgely is very choppy, particularly on this north side for sidewalks, and then portions of Melvin and around here. This is a slide that talks about, and this shows Annapolis Street as being a key area for proposed enhancements. And we'll get into that in a second. But again, the intersections and crosswalks. But here's this concept we're going to introduce, and I brought it up earlier, was the Festival Street on Giddings between Annapolis Street and Ridgely. And I'll get into that in just a second and how that shapes up. Finally, I wanted this slide to show, I guess in a way, this really shows how much opportunity there is in West Annapolis based on all the parking lots. You can see we carved out all the parking lots. A good portion of the land in West Annapolis is parking lots. Real quickly, I'm going to go through, we took street sections on 4 of your main streets just to kind of see how they look on paper, so that when we come back with recommendations, we can redesign what these streets might look like in the future to make West Annapolis more pedestrian friendly and more multimodal, where you have bike lanes and more prominence on the pedestrian versus the automobile, or balancing that the connectivity for pedestrians and automobiles. So Melvin Avenue is actually, this is where you have your bike lane. And actually, when you look at this street section, it is a pretty good section for balancing that variety of uses. So we would like to see that continue down Melvin from the elementary school, but that's a good street section. The next one we saw was Annapolis Street. In a few slides here, I'm going to show what a future street section would look like. So this is just the existing conditions. You have about a 40-foot wide street with some sidewalks on either side that we could really look at how that is done differently. Ridgely Avenue, and Ridgely Avenue kind of represents a standard street section anywhere outside of the other ones we're showing here. You can see that there's fragmented sidewalks along it. There's a wider than needed parking lane. Some sidewalks are up to standards, but your travel lanes really vary widely along the street. And then finally, Giddings, and we're going to show the street section. When I show the proposed street section, it's going to be showing the Festival Street, but this basically just shows us how much road width we have to work with in order to create a special public space out of this street section. So Annapolis Street real quick, here was the existing, and on the bottom you can see what we're proposing. We can take the geometry of the street and continue to include designated parallel parking spaces, but also alternate that with street trees that would start to build upon that tree canopy in West Annapolis, but also provide a really comfortable pedestrian zone and setbacks to the adjacent businesses that either accommodate outdoor seating, maybe as door yards for residential use, but primarily retail uses and what they would have in their connection to the pedestrian zone. This is your standard section. It was somewhat like the Ridgely section, but it's really just kind of cleaning that section up and making sure, instead of having fragmented sidewalks, that we're recommending 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street all around West Annapolis, having a pretty standard parking lane. You don't have to do much on these, but getting these on paper really signals a direction when redevelopment does occur in West Annapolis, which is when we would expect to see these changes happen. You will have a roadmap to do that. And then finally on Giddings Avenue, this is the current section, and on the bottom we're showing if you were to close that street, this is the type of activity you could accommodate. So this is one of those areas that really becomes, it intersects the open space opportunities with the mobility opportunities. So it's taking a street and creating a public open space where if you close the street down, you can have markets between Annapolis Street and Ridgely. We showed 10 by 10 market tents. You can have walkways with those. You could support the infrastructure in these poles here, for example, is more than just a pole to hang a banner. You have Wi-Fi, you have AC outlets for vendors to plug into. You are able to string banners across the street. So it's a multifunctional street. It's a curbless street, but it has bollards to designate the sidewalk in pedestrian areas. But what's really important about this, and this goes for all of our street sections, if you look on either side, you see those are the buildings. What those buildings start to do is really frame the experience in front of it and create an interplay between what's happening inside. Typically, it would be a retail or a restaurant, and then on the street, it becomes a really holistic pedestrian experience between the street and the building itself. So we think the interplay between the land uses that were, or the types of buildings that we're recommending here, and the types of street sections and sidewalks that we're recommending really come together to create a very comfortable and achievable pedestrian realm here that would move West Annapolis more towards that walkability that you're looking for. Okay, so then I'm going to move to parking structure, and I'm going to end and let David have a few words into this too. This is a very important piece of this in looking at, so we talked about the open spaces earlier, but how do if we pick an open space, for example, along Annapolis and Giddings here, if we displace that parking, what happens with it? Or if we introduce more retail here or offices here, where does that parking go? So we started to think about if a parking garage were necessary to accommodate a critical mass of people either shopping or living or working in West Annapolis, this is the type of garage we thought would maybe fit in the scale of this. And if you're familiar with the Gotts Court garage, I believe it's off of West Street. The dimension is about 160 by 180 feet. This accommodates a lot of parking, but we could scale that down to accommodate less. It's the height is lesser of the two necessities. We really need to get this dimension for the flow of traffic. But anyway, we started to look at 3 potential areas that could feasibly, again, these are private lots. We're just doing a test fit to see where things could fit together here. And then we start to think about the roadmap of how we make it work. But there were these 3 areas where a potential structure could fit. Up along Annapolis Street, this is the funeral home along Giddings, or along Ridgely, and the associated parking lot. And then again, along Grauls in the Village Square area, there's a number of configurations where this dimension could work and a number of ways that this could work. So we just, again, it's a test fit in looking at geometries of how things could fit. But when you have these parking areas, a parking area, and you have this Festival Street and Green Spine, you start to create this network of pedestrian friendly activities that not only walkable, but you have these open spaces that we talked about and the activities, and the parking is part of what supports being able to have those amenities, is being able to have people here in that critical mass of people in this area. And this is what a Festival Street could look like, in how adjacent that Festival Street could be to a possible parking structure. So what happens is, the comment earlier was let's expand West Annapolis, which is great, and have connectivity to the external parts of it, West Annapolis. But in a sense, to maintain your sense of community and the character and what you have going in West Annapolis, it's almost a small neighborhood character, and being able to look at being close to activities. And we think that, when you start to pair the open spaces with the potential parking structure locations with the Festival Street and the future land uses you could have here, you really start to create something vibrant and exciting that really takes this neighborhood to the next level, I think. David, did you want to add anything to that? You're on mute, but you said no, I think. You're on mute.
I did it again. No, I think we only have so much time. It'd be great to hear people's comments.
Okay. So with that, Eric, did you want to say something, or are you just prepping to?
I would just add to the idea of the parking garage. I think we've seen it work to good effect in other parts of Annapolis. Small scale integrated parking garages that are designed with the street fabric in mind. In my view, it's not hard to imagine take the site that Jason showed on Annapolis and Taylor right there, something that has retail integrated with the garage on Annapolis Street, a bike shop, for example, or something that is conducive to the kind of retail activity you want on Annapolis Street, and you would have very minimal impacts with adjacent properties, in my opinion, if designed well, and could actually do a few things at once. So
yeah, I'll reiterate, in all cases, I think it's a great strategy to align that base level, the ground level of a parking garage with retail, so that it kind of does hide in its skin.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to propose a handful of questions. Is a Festival Street desired in West Annapolis, and does Giddings make sense for that? Are there any key portions of the sidewalk network that are most important to complete? I had mentioned in the presentation that it's likely that these enhancements would happen concurrent with adjacent development, but is there a strategy to work with the city to try to have some of these enhancements done sooner? And then finally, aside from Melvin Avenue, what streets should be prioritized for bike lanes? Those are kind of the 3 questions I wanted to throw out to the group. So if you'd like to raise your hand, I think there's one hand up, maybe.
Looks like we have Alex. You want to go ahead, Alex?
Sure. I was going to first make a comment about structured parking. I think if you do try to propose those anywhere, as ideas, they should definitely be kept it's kind of as you've shown them on the periphery. I think to locate a structured parking garage, like in the middle of the neighborhood, just would not it just would be an anathema to the walkability of the neighborhood. But if you can locate them sort of on the periphery, especially along the busier roads like Taylor, and certainly that part of Ridgely makes more sense. But getting to the questions that I have a couple comments on the questions that you asked, since I may be the resident bike rider in the crowd here. You know, I mean, ideally, every place would have a separated, you know, bike facility, but, you know, we obviously don't have a lot of room to work with here.
Right.
And so, you know, as a person who rides a bike around, you know, in street clothes just to get to where I'm going, and, you know, not for necessarily for recreation or whatever, I think as long as the streets are slow speed, you know, lanes are 9, 10 feet max, speed limits are, you know, 10, 15 miles an hour. And I don't mean the posted speed limit, but I mean the actual speed limit that people are going to drive, because, you know, if you drive faster than they can hit something, like, you know, State Circle is like that. There's no speed limit sign there, because if you drive faster than 10 miles an hour, you can hit something. And so I think if the design of the street is such that cars are driving slow, you know, riding, at least for an adult anyway, or a teenage kid, riding a bike in traffic's not, you know, with cars, it's not a dangerous thing. You know, kids and, you know, small children, that's another story. And ideally would, you know, it'd be great if we had enough right of way to do all of this, but we really don't. But, you know, and I think Eric's going to talk a little bit about the connections out of the neighborhood towards downtown. So I'll let him talk about that later. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
We have Ray Crosby, but I can just to address what Alex mentioned, just about the bike connections that that we're looking at right now, that, you know, just kind of come from past planning efforts and have just been sort of discussed for a while, and I think we finally have some momentum on them. The really significant project that we're working on with the state and the Navy and the county is finally making that connection from the Navy Bridge, Severn River Bridge, into downtown, into West Annapolis. And there was a feasibility study done last year on how to extend the bike lane as you come over the bridge. You know, as you all probably know, it ends pretty abruptly, but there is right of way there. We just have to reconcile who owns it. So right now, the state and the Navy are reconciling the public right of way, and the city is really keeping them on task with that, knowing that this is going to really benefit the city pretty significantly, and also West Annapolis. So specifically, so that's a big one. We got a Bikeways grant from the state recently that's going to be funding design work on various gap bike segments across the city. We're actually not probably going to use the grant because the state and the Navy are sort of pushing forward on this connection from the Navy Bridge. We are going to look at King George Street, so not far from West Annapolis, but we are looking for how to get folks into downtown. That feasibility study stopped at College Creek Bridge on King George Street, so we are looking at picking up from there. And in the comp plan, we're sort of updating the bike master plan that was last done in 2011. So a lot of those recommendations are still really valid. The ones that Jason's showing on the map here will pretty much come from that plan, but we're going to be looking at some more specific strategies on how to get them implemented sooner than later. So yeah, that's just kind of a quick update on things. It's a big deal in the comp plan, just mobility in general, and just the fact that we have a kind of disjointed bike network in the city, as folks probably know. And so we're trying to make some significant headway on completing those gaps. But
Great, thanks, Eric.
back to the questions.
Yeah, looks like we have one hand up and we have about 5 minutes left. So maybe time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, like Ray Crosby.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep.
So first of all, thank you for doing this. Very exciting, and commend you on a couple of things. I've got an office building and another piece of property now in West Annapolis. And I think, it's visible that you're trying to keep the character of the community, which I think is, number one. I love the village concept about the main, the transition, the corridor, and the square. That really kind of puts a really nice strategic framework around the whole thing. Just a couple of just comments. One is, as you guys are thinking about things, keep in mind the daytime workforce. So I've got 100 employees in my building. Every day, I would say 60 of them walk out the door and go to eat at Bean Rush, to go to Growls, to go to Mexican Cafe, to buy bread at the Great Harvest. And I think, that's just one building. And then there's all the doctor's offices there. There's MRE's properties on Giddings. There's the medical office buildings. There's a huge amount of employees and workers there. And I think trying to keep those people in a walkable environment to want to stay there instead of getting in their car and drive, because I have a lot of people that go, there's only 3 or 4 choices in West Annapolis. So I get in my car and they drive over to the town center or they drive to West Street. So I think, just kind of keep that in mind. There's a lot of daytime thing, and they're a good economic engine. And they kind of come in the morning and then they leave. So it doesn't hurt the residential character at all, but it really contributes to the vibrancy. Other comments, if there's a way to make Annapolis Street more amazing and really make that the core and the placemaking, I still think it's struggling a lot. And if I was going to invest, if I was the city and I was going to say, where are we going to put all our chips on the table for this new plan? I think making Annapolis Street even more of a destination. And, you've got some parking ideas, you've got more green, but I think it can go way beyond that. Some of the photos you showed are, they're really like walkable, like, hey, we got to go over there this weekend and do this, or on a, Wednesday night, there's 3 great restaurants over there. We got to go to that little 1 street corridor. So I think doing more there, I know this all gets into property ownership and all that type of thing, but that is kind of West Annapolis to many people. And I think to build that up even more and to really invest in that. The green spine is a cool idea, and I like the festival as a temporary thing, but to take the green spine all the way down Giddings towards Rowell, where there's mostly commercial and daytime, there's no residential. I'd rather see you kind of stop the green spine at Ridgely and invest more in Annapolis Street of really making that even greater. Just a thought. And then, you pointed out something that's really interesting is about leveraging the school. It's very odd. Like, I don't think anybody even thinks of that, like green space over there as a place the community could do a lot of things. You could have Friday night concert series, all kinds of things. And I don't know the legality of that because it's a school property, but I assume it's a public destination. The last thing is, and this might not be very popular, I have no skin in this game, but I would go big on the village and I would go vertical. If you want to do something with mixed use, you look at that photo and 60% of the property is just blacktop.
Mm-hmm.
Let that go vertical. Put a good sized residential building at the corner, could be right across the street from where the funeral home is. Put your parking structure there, put some underground parking, let somebody build a good sized tower, or let them do it right off a Rowell. Keep the retail, but create more of a a mixed use. It really isn't in the neighborhood, so to speak. And in a way, it would almost kind of frame Rao Boulevard as you have the courthouse on one side and think of a larger vertical structure. It wouldn't be in the community. It wouldn't destroy any of the character of the community, but nobody's going to put big time bucks in making that great unless they can go vertical. It's just not going to happen. It's going to stay what it is until somebody can really make something of that property for what they're going to have to pay for it. So I would say it's on the periphery. It is the village opportunity. And if you focus the verticalness on the south side of the property, that would allow you to keep the north side of the property to be more community focused and that type of thing. And I just think it could be a really nice, it could kind of almost bookend that you're entering the community. It could actually act as almost like kind of a buffer that you're now entering this kind of West Annapolis corridor. So that's all I have, but I commend you, and I'm sure it's not fun to take 80 people's different opinions and try to put in your plan, but that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Ray. Good comments. And that's the gig I signed up for. So I guess.
Do we have time for a comment, or are there more questions?
Yeah, we're over time now, I see, but we have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we should definitely take the questions that we still have.
I think we should try to do that, and then sorry about that.
No, we should.
Looks like Rennie and then Molly Smith.
Thank you. I will be super quick. Thanks, Ray, for those comments because they were really good. But as I was thinking about the vertical in this one particular spot, which I think makes sense as well, the thought came into my mind that there's just so much demand for hotel space here that that might be something that would appeal to a developer. And I just wanted to go on record and say, I don't think that would be a great thing. I would like for our neighborhood to be more residential and focused on people who live here and not necessarily be a state of hotel for events at the stadium across the street. So just putting those two.
Thank you.
Jason, can I make just a very quick comment? I want to reiterate that we feel very strongly that development is a tool to create the neighborhood you want. And it's not a matter of you don't need to put up with things that don't contribute to your quality and character as a community. I also want to say, I think it'd be really valuable to come back with a very frank and direct discussion that looks at economics, that shows you different examples of what different heights that may be 3, 5, or 7 floors. It probably will be hard to build something more than that, so because tall buildings get very expensive, would look like, how they might work, and we can all make some decisions together about the future of what Jason has called the Village Square. Clearly a lot of comments are going there. I have to say, if there's one piece of West Annapolis that actually, to me, it would be the redevelopment that would bring this in to West Annapolis, make it a place that's as valued as every other part of West Annapolis.
Good point. Oops. All right. Looks like we have one more question.
Molly Smith.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
My question is, how many people last call?
It would
The last
probably-
con call we had, how many people?
Probably around 50.
At the last
60.
workshop, I think we had between 50 and 60. I know the most people that took a poll question were 55.
Yeah, and how many we have this evening?
We can't see.
How many people did we have this evening?
We had 20
We had-
some when we started.
We started with 20, we lost a few people along the way.
Closer to 40 at one point.
Yeah.
Was there? Okay, I wasn't.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I think all your plans are great. To beautify the neighborhood, you always pay a price for something, right? So we're talking about adding density, which the neighborhood, some vibrancy, which I think all good. Had a decline number of people per workshops. So my concern is how we get community buy-in, what your next steps are. The people that be resistant to this, some ideas, sales standpoint, if you can figure out a roadblock Annapolis Street as a detour for the Bay Bridge on weekends, that might help sell the direction that you're trying to go in. So I just wanted that input.
Thank you.
That's great input. I would just add, just in terms of the community buy-in, I mean, I think, well, we are gonna, I mean, if maybe Jason, could you go back to the schedule again at the beginning? Sorry.
Yep.
I'll just, since we're kind of closing here, I should just remind folks of this timeline, so Stantec is gonna, these are great comments we heard tonight. I know most of you have probably something else on your mind that may be a little more important, but we got great feedback tonight, in my opinion, and we took good notes. This is being recorded as well. So we're gonna start piecing this together into something that's a little more cohesive, vision-wise, and then we're going to be sharing a final presentation that I think the idea is that we could try to reach a lot of people in that at that juncture, as many as we can. We've been working with the Civic Association and Ward Improvement Association and the business affiliate. So we're going to go that route again. And I think, the more eyes we can get on the final presentation, the better. I mean, I think we do want community buy-in. I think we've tried to have this be an open process. And, I think if there are concerns between now and the final presentation, I'm here to keep the conversation going, as well as specific issues, but that's kind of our plan. So I think spread the word about this project, and we're gonna share this presentation on the website we have for the project, which is part of the sidebar. If you just Google Annapolis Comprehensive Plan, that'll take you to our website for the project. And then there's a sidebar that has a link to the West Annapolis Master Plan. And that's where we're kind of compiling the work from this project. So hopefully that's clear. Any final comments from folks at Stantec or Alderman Payon or any other panelists? Okay, we're good.
No, nothing here other than I appreciate it's been great to, we're starting to work with the community now a couple times and looking forward to coming back the next time. But we really value the comments, and it goes a long way in helping us to help you shape the future of your neighborhood. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who's participating this evening.
I'll just add that one thing I think we really appreciate, I know Jason does, is how, not specific's the wrong word, but how tangible your comments are. You're clear and really giving us useful direction, which is very helpful.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is great. I mean, you really are getting involved and being quite helpful to the ultimate process here. Thanks again.
Right.
Great to hear.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks. Have a great evening, and stay in touch.
All right. Good night.
Good night.